Hello and welcome to Quizzitok. Today, we're diving into the world of food, journalism, and factual storytelling with someone who's been a trailblazer in all three, Vir Sanghvi. Notably, in 1978, at the age of 22, Vir became the editor of Bombay Magazine, making him the youngest editor in Indian journalism history. Rude Food won the Contro Award for Best Food Literature Book in the world in 2004. So whether you're a teacher, student, or just someone looking for appetizing food for thought, grab your favorite snack and join us for an engaging conversation that promises to be as satisfying as a 7-course meal. Hello and welcome to Quizzitok, the show where we explore the stories, journeys, learnings, and insights of path-breaking individuals who've made a difference in their fields. Today, we're diving into the world of food, journalism, and factual storytelling with someone who's been a trailblazer in all three, Vir Sanghvi. Hi, Vir. Good to have you on this chat.
Nice to be
Thank you so much for joining us.
It's very odd because we've been working together off and on with you as producer since 1997.
That's
It's
right.
actually the first time we shared a screen together.
Come to think of it, indeed.
28, 29 years.
That's right. It's a
still
question
odd
of
for me-
answers.
It's still odd for me to see you sitting here and not there as producer running the show.
No, I'm not the producer. This one is Adrian Shepherd and his team. Notably, in 1978, at the age of 22, Vir became the editor of Bombay Magazine, making him the youngest editor in Indian journalism history. From being one of India's youngest magazine editors to a celebrated food writer and lucid commentator on current affairs and politics, Vir has donned many hats. His column, Rude Food, won the Contro Award for Best Food Literature Book in the world in 2004. And today, we'll pay particular attention to his culinary adventures too, his views on the evolution of media, and what it takes to stay grounded in truth and fairness in the era of digital information and misinformation. So whether you're a teacher, student, or just someone looking for appetizing food for thought, grab your favorite snack and join us for an engaging conversation that promises to be as satisfying as a 7-course meal. Which is the last 7-course meal that you might have had.
With a build-up like that, you're just setting me up to fail.
No.
Thank you, Babu. Thank you so much. I think I should mention that very glowing and vastly exaggerated profile that you gave. You didn't mention that the reason I was successful on television was in 1997, I made a show called A Question of Answers, of which I was the anchor, of which we did nearly 100 episodes.
Indeed.
Which was on the old Star Plus, was incredibly well watched and influential. And that was all because of you. It was your idea. You devised the show. You produced it. So whatever television career I had, I owe to you.
Vir, thank you. Again, that's very generous because I think you was an exemplary host because of the way you moderated it with such balance and with such clarity of thought, which is, I think, what marks all your writing and everything that you do. I'm a genuine admirer of your food columns for sure. Rude Food is an appointment for me.
Thank you.
Brunch, and I read because of Rude Food, and your comments too. And all the articles that you're writing now, whether it's the Hindustan Times or print, is something that I look forward to for just the lucidity of thought and the way you simplify the most complex things. And genuine admirer, there was no exaggeration in the introduction as far as I'm concerned.
I'm really embarrassed, but thank you.
You're welcome. Vir, you had such a dynamic career, but let's start with your roots.
Okay.
Growing up in Mumbai, your education at Mayo, and then heading off to Oxford, how did all those experiences shape you? Shape the writer and storyteller? Tell us.
Well, almost everything, Babu, though now I look back on it and it sounds from the outside like massive privilege, came out of some kind of tragedy. When I was in 1965, when I was, I think, 9 years old, my mother fell very ill. And she had some kind of anemia. They thought it would be leukemia. It wasn't, thank God. And they thought she would die. And she was at home. And I was a little boy, and every day they would come and give her blood transfusions, and there would be nurses and doctors. And my father said that's no environment to bring a child up in. I was an only son. So he sent me off to boarding school, which is how I went to Mayo. Fortunately, my mother then recovered and lived for many, many years after that. My father, on the other hand, in 1971, when I was 50, he lived in London and Bombay, dividing his time. We had flats in both places. Was unfortunately a heavy smoker, got lung cancer. In those days, they weren't so concerned about stuff like that. Nobody caught the lung cancer. It went to the liver, and I think from the time they found it to the time he died was like 3 months.
That's scrappy.
Yeah, so it was really sad and tragic, and I went back home, and I really had no sense of what the future would be like, because with my father, he'd got a plan for what I would do, etc. And my life was suddenly up for grabs. And my mother, who I loved very much, was not a strong person. So rather than my leaning on her, it was the other way around. And so I was left in this situation where I had to fend for myself. He'd left enough money with my relatives for me to be educated. But so I went to London in 73, and I stayed with an aunt, and I said, I've got to find a school. And she said, okay, how do we do this? So there used to be in those days a book called The Public Schools Handbook. So I bought it, and I was very clear. I'd been in Mayo and one uniform. I wanted a school near London, in London, where I could have a relatively easy time. I found one in North London called Mill Hill. I rung up the headmaster, and they put me through a section. He said, I'd like to come and see him. And I think he was very intrigued. So I went and saw him. And he said, can you explain to me why you've come yourself and nobody else has come or brought you? And I said, well, because there isn't anyone else. So he said, okay, supposing we do give you a place, because you realize that most people apply years in advance, how would you pay your fees? So I said, I pay. So he said, really, like how? So I pulled out a checkbook and I wrote up the first term's fees. And
You were what?
well, the 73, I was 16 and a half. So
16 and a half.
yeah.
And you went on your own without
Well,
a parent, of course.
because nobody else would do it. So while it sounds actually quite glamorous now in retrospect, actually nearly everything emerged out of tragedy and out of having to do it myself.
That's truly remarkable. My God. Some of that I know from Rude Life, which is a remarkably candid biography of how things happened. And but now that you tell it, to think of the circumstance in which you did that, Mayo can be tough. It's a boarding school up to a point. But again, it's as a public school, it encourages talent. So some of your writing and speaking may have been honed there. But then you moved on to London, finished school there,
Yeah.
and then went to college.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
So, and at college, that was at Oxford.
Yep.
What did you study
Well,
there? How did that happen?
That was also bizarre. In those days, if you did 2 years, you took an exam called the A level, and if you did very well in your A levels, you got into good universities, except for Oxford and Cambridge, which said you to stay on for another term and do a special examination to get in. So I went back when all my friends had gone off, and I was in Mill Hill for another term. And one of this England was slightly old school boy network in those days. One of my teachers met a Don at Oxford and said, this bright guy. And he said, send him to see us. So he said, go and see the college, see what it's like. So I went up and I assumed that this old boy network was in action and I would be treated to a glass of sherry and come back. And I wandered into this room where there were 4 Dons and the light was against them. So they were silhouetted against the light. And there was a chair in the center, and I sat at the center thinking, what the hell is going on? And they said to me, so you study economics, do you, Mr. Sanghvi? So I said, yes. Are you a Keynesian? Or are you a monetarist? And it went on like this kind of rapid fire stuff, most of which I thought I couldn't answer.
Sounds like an inquisition.
It was like the KGB. And so I went back, and then there was a weekend, and the following Monday, my Don said to me, my tutor there said to me, how did the Oxford thing with the Dons go? I said, I think you should have told me it was going to be an academic interview, not somebody showing me around, etc. So he said, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that either. The following day, there was a letter in my pigeonhole. In those days, the pigeonholes, like from the college pigeonholes, saying we're happy to offer you a place. You don't have to take the exam to get in. You can take it for a scholarship. So I told my teacher, I said, listen, you were right. They were actually very nice. So, but I thought I'd done really badly. He said, yeah, you have a tendency to overwhelm yourself, which I think is, I've still maintained.
Which college was this?
It's a college called Brasenose.
Okay.
It's one of the first 4 colleges that admitted women. So there were women at Oxford when I went in my college. Though now everything is unisex. It wasn't then. It had originally a reputation for being a rugby college, and so I was pretty much the wrong person to go
Go to Brasenose.
But by the time I was there, it had actually changed. It was still, I think, pretty short on distinguished alumni there. Most famous alumnus who came to talk to us was Jeffrey Archer, which is not a recommendation. Though later David Cameron went and did exactly the same subjects as me, the same college. So it kind of went up. But it was a fun college, informal, and I had a great time. It wasn't actually a rugby college. But, these things don't make it. And Salman Khurshid, who was there doing a postgraduate degree when I was there, was probably Oxford's most brilliant lawyer at that stage, was at a college called St. Edmund Hall.
Yes.
And that was a complete sort of rugby college. The story was that when you went for the interview, the master and the fellows stood around. And as you entered the room, they threw a rugby ball at you. And if you caught it, you were in. And if you threw it back, they gave you a scholarship. So we weren't quite so bad.
What was your experience at Oxford like?
So I loved it. I loved it, but a lot of people who go to Oxford act like a list of people who go to Doom School, and so they act like it was a high spot of their lives and everything is downhill since then. Oxford was fun. It was certainly not the high spot of my life for a very simple reason, in that Oxford sounds like 3 years. Actually, each year is 3 terms of 8 weeks each.
Okay.
So 6 months of the year, you're not at Oxford. You have to do your own thing. So I came back to India every vacation, and I knew Moini Buller, who was then working for India Today, and it was not called India Today, it was called Thomson Media, and they'd started a magazine. And Aroon Purie, who I knew through her, said to me, I was like a school leaver, I hadn't even got up to Oxford. It's in the gap between joining Brasenose and leaving Mill Hill. Will you write for us? Because this was partly an altruistic act, but mostly because they didn't want to pay anybody and nobody would write for them anyway. So I wrote for them, and I came back every vacation, and I wrote quite seriously as a journalist. And I knew, because it was coming easily and naturally to me, that I would do this when I finished. So I treated Oxford as fun, as an academic exercise of some limited importance. But I was very conscious that I wouldn't stay in England, that I would come back to India. And this used to completely freak out the dons at Oxford, because in those days, 70s, we had a very different image of India. They could not believe that anyone would want to go back. And they said, do you have a business to go to or anything? So I said, no. A family which is like, so I said, no. So why are you going back? I said, because it's my country. So they said, what will you do? So I said, I'll probably become a journalist. And they said, well, you can become a journalist here. So I said, yes, I can write about British politics. But let's be honest, at the end of the day, I don't care about Britain or British politics. I don't give a monkeys about who your prime minister is. I care about my country. And if I'm going to be a journalist, I'll be a journalist in my own country. So couldn't give up. Isn't there anything else you would like to do? So I said, yeah. I used to listen to a lot of music. It seemed like a relatively flip thing to say. I said, yeah, I'd love to join the record business. Ha ha ha. And they said, okay, very seriously. And then they called me back the following week and they said, do you know who Bhaskar Menon is? And I said, okay, I'm done for. They've done their work. Bhaskar Menon was at that stage the chairman of EMI Records.
Yes.
And the most important person in the music business, who had a background similar to me. He went to school in India and then came to Oxford and then joined EMI. And they said, well, I'm sure he'll be sympathetic. We have written to him. So they wrote to Bhaskar, again, the sort of old Oxford network, wrote to Bhaskar Menon saying, we have this very bright student who wants to join the record business, and he's an Indian like you, so would you be interested in hiring him? And Bhaskar very kindly wrote back and offered me a job. But by then I was kind of committed to India Today. So I met him some years before he died. And he said to me, aren't you glad you didn't join the record business? It's finished. So I said, have you seen journalism? We're pretty finished too.
But that's how your journalism began.
Yeah, it was completely by my life's been a series of accidents. There's been no deliberate plan of any kind.
And as you said, beginning in pretty tragic circumstances and impulses, both in the case of your mother's illness as well as your father's early demise, as it were, and then moved on from one thing to the other. And you, how should I say, you improvised your way through some exceptional.
I was fortunate. I knew Moini Balar because her son was my best friend at school.
Okay.
She knew the Puris. They were starting in it. So it was the right place at the right time. You said that I was made editor at 78, just before I came back from Oxford at the age of 22, of the magazine they wanted to launch, which became Bombay Magazine. But though it sounds grand in retrospect, in truth, there weren't that many journalists, there weren't that many people who were interested. So it was the beginning of the magazine boom. It was right place, right time.
That was going to be my next line of questioning.
Yeah.
In any case, that impulse towards journalism, your interest in it, in writing, that obviously sort of crystallized and matured through time, through school and college and all the rest of it. But it's quite a journey, and then it evolved into investigative journalism at Sunday Magazine and later in Sun Times.
Yeah.
Did you ever imagine earlier that you would be India's youngest editor at the age of 22?
No, but I don't think anybody else even knew I was India's youngest editor, because Bombay Magazine was a big phenomenon in Bombay. It was pretty unknown in the rest of India, though I had, while I was at Oxford and I'd gone back in every vacation, I'd done by that stage 5 cover stories for India Today, which was beginning to be established. And in many ways, I was better known for that. I had to take a training because Aroon said to me that all these kids want to be political journalists. Don't make that mistake. You're a journalist. Whether you're writing about Raj Kapoor or you're writing about Indira Gandhi, you're still journalism. And that's a principle I've maintained all my life.
So you did that stint at Bombay. You were writing for India Today, and at one point you moved to Sunday Magazine, which was
There was a phase in between. I moved. Actually, I then left Bombay because I was, despite what Aroon had said, I was a little worried about being typed as a sort of glossy magazine journalist. So I got a travel fellowship from something called the Edelax Foundation.
Yes.
And I said I wanted to talk to foreign journalists and ask them what they thought about India, because we believed in India, particularly under Mrs. Gandhi, that the deep state, we didn't have that term, in the US and the UK was out to get us. And
Yes.
everybody in the foreign media was essentially an assassin waiting to pounce on India. So I went to meet those people and check if this was true. It was not true, but it's a thing that insecure regimes always say. And they're saying it now again. But I came back having finished that. And I thought, do I really want to be a journalist? Do I want to get into the publishing business? And I joined a pretty defunct magazine called Imprint. And the owner then said, Mr. Arni Pandit said he wanted to revive it as a features magazine. So I did that.
It was a very literary magazine.
Original,
Yeah, that's it, original. And then he wanted to make it into feature magazine.
Well, he said, do something with it. And I'm not a very literary person. So I made it a feature magazine. And it did okay as feature magazines did in those days. And then in 1986, I thought, again, I had been beset with the same kind of doubts after Bombay Magazine. I said, I don't want to be typecast as a Bombay journalist all my life. And Bombay is great, but it's not India. I want to have some experiences somewhere else. So I'd read all of Vir Sarkar and APP's publications. I knew people who worked for them. I knew Akbar a bit. And Akbar in those days was like a law unto himself. His proprietors hardly mattered. Vir Sarkar was seen as the man who accompanied MJ Akbar. And I thought, this is obviously a man with no ego, who's only interested in excellence if he's willing to do that. So let me go and see him. So I phoned him out of the blue and I said, this is who I am. And he said, yeah, I know who you are. Will you come and see me? So I said, yeah, do you want me to come to Calcutta? So he said, first, come and see me in my flat in Bombay, which was in Mafatlal Park, which is on Breach Candy. And I wandered in, and there, perched on the sofa, was this very elegant Bengali gentleman in a dhoti with diamond buttons and sleeves on his kurta. It was like a painting, sort of. And I went in and I sat down. So he said, you studied in England? So I said, yeah, I did. Oxford or Cambridge? And you had the feeling that if I'd said Birmingham, you'd have terminated the interview and thrown me out. So he said, come to Calcutta. I'm sure you'll love it. It's not true. But I then went to Calcutta. I stayed at the Grand. And I called him and I said, I've come to Anand Bazaar, which is where your office is. Can you give me the address? And he laughed in the superior sort of way. And he said, this is Calcutta. We are the establishment. Ask anyone. All right. So then I went down. I took a taxi from the Oberoi Grand. The doorman explained to the guy where I was going. And we drove to this really impressive grand building. And we drove it. And the guy said to me that this is the newspaper office. And I got out and I went to the reception and I said, can I see a Vikasakar? And the guy looked at me like I was mad and said, where do you think you've come? So I looked at the board. It said the Statesman. So fortunately, ABP was like a walking distance. The guy kindly pointed me. So with my tail between my legs, I went to ABP, which is how I got into Sunday.
Right. And it was a remarkable stint. At that point, at one point, it became India's most widely sold news magazine.
No. We used to phrase this carefully. Most widely sold news weekly, because it was then a fortnightly.
That's the catch.
Which was very carefully phrased.
Yeah. The trick, the keys of the
know
language.
that, yeah.
So, most widely sold weekly, which is also a big one, a big thing for it to be.
Yeah.
And I remember every week to break stories and to come out, that must have been a killing pace. And
Yeah, also because though Avik is a very nice man and I think I enjoyed working for him more than anything else, they also weren't prepared to spend much money on Sunday. So we were printed in horrible newspaper presses. The paper was very bad. Our salaries were about 1/4 of what Indian was paying. Our total budget was 1/5 of what Indian was paying. So everything was, there's an element of karate or kung fu, where you go up against a much stronger opponent and you find little ways of doing it. So it was fun. So I did it for a long time. I joined in 86 and I stopped being editor full time in 1993 and Aditi Fadnis took over. And then I hung around as sort of vague editorial responsibilities at Anand Bazaar till 1999. The bid from 96 onwards, of course, everything changed because of people like you, because I started doing television.
television started happening. And of course, later you moved, in terms of print journalism, you moved on to Hindustan Times.
But by the time I moved to the HT, I was already a successful television journalist.
Yes.
So if I hadn't moved into the HT, I would have given up print and just done television and been unemployed now. Yeah.
No, but Question of Answers, I remember at that time was a groundbreaking show. I remember a conversation we had at the Indian National Center when we first met.
Yeah.
And Siddhartha Basu had said that, this is something I would do. Why don't you meet Vir? And we spoke together. And I remember one of the things that I was eagerly looking to do at that point of time, there wasn't any kind of debate program on
There's
that
nothing.
time.
There was just a horrible panel discussions on Doordarshan.
Yeah. And I remember one of the conversations I remember mentioning to you, and, we seemed to agree on that, look, let's keep the emphasis on light, not heat.
Yeah.
With information, with an informed debate. And we had very articulate people, defining their positions very clearly. And what a panel of people we had on the show. Everybody at some point. A sitting prime minister came to the debate.
The current prime minister, Narendra Modi, was in the panel once.
That's right. And a very different Narendra Modi at that time.
Unrecognizable.
Yes, that's right. And he was I remember he came a number of times, I think.
I knew him a bit and he said, listen, I won't be able to speak in English. And he's a Gujarati and I'm a Gujarati. And I said, don't worry, we won't be able to do Gujarati, but you answer in Hindi because you speak English well enough, even though you're not confident enough to do in camera. And he came, he was really good-natured and fun, you remember?
That's right. And spoke with quite a lot of clarity.
Yeah.
And was very reasonable in terms of the discussion. Some people were very emphatic and, we had a lot of lawyers, exceptional lawyers in that discussion. But I enjoyed that.
Aroon Purie, yes, was sort of, his television career was the creation of Question of Answers. That's right. His niece used to work for you and she kept asking us to get him as a guest. Ranjana, yeah. And we got him as a guest and he just flowered. And I'd known him socially, but I had no idea he would end up being so articulate on camera. And it was like a half-hour show, so he couldn't talk a lot, but it was nicely done.
Yeah, and I think people came out of those positions. And you would recall, one of the things we innovated is that we would poll the studio audience.
It was all you. You had this device, people don't remember this, he had a device on people's chairs And when you came in, I would say, this is the motion. Are you for it or are you against it? And people would say yes or no on it. And then we would do it again at the end of the show to see how many minds we had changed.
That's right. And if we needed to do spot polls in between on anything, then we could get an instant response.
Which had never been done on Indian television.
No, it had never been done. And
Probably has been done since.
I don't think so. And I think it should, because they use it as a marketing device, actually, these days. And, that kind of mechanism and electronics is something that is available. They should do it. No, but it's...
But you remember the original idea, Ratikant Basu had just joined Star TV, said to us, let's do the BBC's Question Time.
Yes.
And neither of us was keen on doing it. And Babu, who was the producer, recast this program. I had said I didn't want to do many subjects. And he reinvented the show. Then nobody who saw it thought of Question Time. And seeing our success, the BBC started Question Time India, which we consistently outperformed by a long way, week after week after week.
That's right. I remember that. And in the wake of Question of Answers, you would recall there were other debate programs that began with all had to do with fighting.
Yes.
And eventually they won. Because, you see street fights being engineered and what passes for debate. They're not debates at all, because they're just cockfights, actually.
I have a theory about that.
Yeah, tell us.
Which is that English language television, which was, well, let's not beat around the bush, quite genteel and civilized for a long time,
Yes.
was always different from Hindi television, where these debates were quite common and there was a lot of heat and there was a lot of fire. I don't know if people realize this in the bad old days of ratings when people used to use TRPs. The English language news universe was like, 0.5%, and Hindi was like 3-4% of the audience. So if, as a television show, you manage to get even a tiny proportion of the Hindi audience, then your ratings shot up.
Yeah.
Which is why so many anchors later started using Hindi on their shows and started encouraging fights and all of that. And they would get Hindi viewers who would tune in just for the maramari, and they would claim they were great rating successes.
A very sad fact, and also a function of budget too, because 24/7 news channels don't necessarily have the budget to do any news gathering.
They don't have the budget to do 1 hour of news, let alone 24. Yeah?
Well, there you are. And so it's much easier to get a bunch of people in the studio and get them fighting with each other, and often are told, I've been told as a guest, sometimes, you take X1, you take Y on, and whatever it is. And when I was asked, why are you taking that position? I said, because you asked me to. I wasn't invited again, thankfully, because that's not...
But also, I mean, I say this because people don't realize, if you watch a television debate now, it's basically party spokesmen and professional fighters who are invited onto the channels. In those days, you had real people of consequence going to the studio and talking. Babu's mentioned we had the sitting Prime Minister, Inder Gujral, who was then Prime Minister of India,
Yes.
came to the studio. We'd said that if you want to talk about the economy, bring your finance minister along. So Chidambaram railed behind a holding his dhoti and sat in there. The audience asked questions too. Other panelists asked questions which were not necessarily very respectful. And these guys answered them on equal terms. We had every minister of consequence came to the studio. Every opposition leader of consequence came.
Heavyweights.
People took television seriously and we took them seriously. Now is it tamasha?
Yeah, we had, the A-listers that came onto the show was the who's who.
Yeah.
I think of Indian policy and thought at that point of time, political thought.
You remember? I'm sorry, I would have.
Please do.
We had T.N. Session in the studio, and he was then election commissioner and was a big deal. And he came because he was a bit of a megalomania. He came with about 11 black cats and holding submachine guns. And Babu went out to receive him. You remember this?
Yes.
And I was behind watching. And as Babu approached him, Session shouted, "Fall back!" He was talking to the commandos. It was utterly
Right, I was wondering what he meant, but yeah. And he was absolutely, an authoritarian. But a very effective election commissioner.
Oh, anyway, he changed the rules. I mean,
Yes.
away from politicians for a brief period. The election commission was really fair and all powerful.
Yes, that's right. And he did that.
Yeah.
And we had so many of those people on that show. A show that, we're proud of. I don't know if it's on. Briefly, I think it was put onto the OTT platform, and then it was pulled suddenly.
And then they pulled most of the clips from YouTube as well.
Yes, evidently. For what reason?
I have not
I'm,
understood.
I'm,
I have not
I'm really not clear.
Yeah.
But those were glory days, and I believe, and you were terrific as the host because it was so.
It was your show, Babu. It's kind of say that.
It takes a village to make any kind of show, including that one. But you led it, and that is what I think was remarkable. What's your view on the way media is going now? You know, what's happening on news, the way, well, all over the world, really, but particularly in India. And now with social media, you know, breaking news, it's every second something or the other is coming on. How do people stay on top of this treadmill?
They don't. I think the short answer is that people are more ignorant now than they've been at any time. You would think that with more access to information, people would be better informed, in a better position to make judgments. But because so much of the news in the actual media, I'm not saying that mainstream media, television, and newspapers are any different. So much of it is biased and done to please powerful people, and because social media is a mine of lies and lies and lies, people really don't know what the truth is any longer. It's like when Kellyanne Conway said, when she was presented with facts, she said there are alternative facts. Yes, so similarly in India, there are 8 alternative facts for every event.
And people believe what they want to believe.
Exactly.
And so they believe the narrative they want to believe. And which was going to be my next question. What's the role of sound research and fact checking in this era of breaking news and viral trends, which are often very motivated?
They're nearly all motivated. At one stage, they used to tell me that if you want to trend on Twitter, this is how to do it, etc. And I had no idea it was so easy or so cheap. But because we're into this trending on social media, because nearly everybody who claims to fact check has an ideological position, people on whichever the other side of the ideology are opposed to them. So I despair sometimes because there is no way of knowing the truth. Even a simple thing like we're shooting this program on the day when Zakir Hussain, one of our greatest musicians, died. But the night before, the INB ministry put out a tweet condoling his death, and his relatives tweeted, say he's not dead yet. And then the INB ministry withdrew the tweet, and then all the people who'd done condolence tweets withdrew them. He died several hours later. But this is a situation where the ministry, acting on what it had read in social media, actually tweeted a condolence, which everyone took as confirmation. Must be right.
If it's from the INB ministry, yeah, you think that this is, as verified as it can get.
Yeah. So you can't believe anything. It's like Humphrey says in Yes Minister, never believe anything till it's been denied at least once.
I want to come back to how people are supposed to cope. How's the younger generation supposed to equip themselves to tell a lie from the truth, to tell fact from a bit of
Two things. One, they can't. I mean, there's that famous saying that a lie has traveled halfway across the world while the truth is still putting its pants on.
Yes.
So that's true. And two, and that's the other thing, that earlier, if there were lies and damaging lies, they would linger and they would stay. Now, attention spans and things like this are so short that people hear something terrible. It isn't true, but they believe it. But by next week, they've forgotten. So you have a mixture of willful ignorance and ignorance by design.
I'm going to come back to that after a more appetizing section.
All right. Okay.
Which is on food as a cultural lens. Okay. You've said that food is more than just sustenance.
Yeah.
It's a story, it's a culture, a way of life. How did you make the leap from hard-hitting journalism to food writing? And why do you think root food resonates the way it does with so many, including me?
I'm not sure it does any longer, but I'll tell you the story. I was editor of the Hindustan Times. We were revamping our Sunday magazine, which is a broadsheet, which eventually became Brunch, which some of you will know. And I said to Poonam Saxena, who was the editor, that you have to put in a food column. And she said, why would I put in a food column? And I said, because food is going to be big. And everybody in the paper was very skeptical. And I said, and I think I've been vindicated, I said, we are talking now about 2000, 2001. I said, in this century, as the middle class makes more money, everywhere in the world, they then get interested in food, they get interested in travel. This will happen in India. Your readers will be much more interested in food than you're willing to admit. So they hummed and hawed, and I was the editor. They couldn't say, you're an idiot. So they pretended they agreed. And then they were ready to prepare the dummy, and there was no food column. So I said, where is the food column? And they said, we couldn't find anyone. Will you think of someone? So I said, I can't. It's your job. We can't find anyone. So I said, okay, I'll do it under a pseudonym for the first 3 months. And then you can show it to people and say, can you do this kind of column? So they said, sure. And we agreed as a name, Grand Fromage, which of course means best cheese. So it was like a slightly childish joke because the editor was doing it. And then the column took off. And then Penguin, the following couple of years later, published a book, a collection of root food columns. And they said, we can't have it authored by some person called Grand Fromage. You have to put your name to it. So then eventually I started signing it.
Where did the name Rude come from? Rude food, rude life. Is it something I've always meant to ask you but never have?
It's a completely stupid thing. I just wanted a headline that rhymed, and rude food seemed nice. And I'd had a reputation, I'd written about food before, of not doing PR type pieces and not being a respecter of people's advertising budgets or whatever.
So being blunt.
So I said, let's make it blunt. But it wasn't intended to be a rude column at all.
No, it's not. It's not. And one doesn't associate rudeness with you in any form.
Yeah, but I'm stuck with this. No? Penguin called my autobiography a rude life. So I'm not a particularly rude person. Not stuck with this rude, that rude. Looks like.
Vir, you've traveled extensively across India and the world in covering some amazing food stories. If you're up for a culinary overview of our country, how would you simply describe the richness and diversity of Indian cuisine?
I think people don't understand, people outside of India, sometimes within India also, that you can't compare India to Italy or wherever. You can only compare India to, say, possibly China, but certainly Europe. Because the level of diversity you see in Indian cuisine is unequaled, I think, by most nations. It varies so much. And if you look at, say, Naga food, and you look at the food of Goa, for instance, they're both very, very different. You look at the food of Kashmir and you look at the food of Kerala, they're just completely different. And it's very difficult to explain to people that there is no such thing as Indian cuisine. There is a family of cuisines which we take with the name of Indian cuisine. Possibly the only things they have in common are some kind of bread. And almost certainly the only thing that really unites India is dal. Everybody eats lentils, perhaps not in the northeast, not that much certainly, but otherwise there's a dal in every part of India.
Come to think of it, it's true. The diversity is incredible. I think it was Jawaharlal Nehru said that, we have to start thinking of India more as a continent than a country because there's such diverse cultures and cuisines all hanging together and united by a dal. There was a bunch of other things.
This he probably said, but there are many sort of random quotes attributed to Nehru, which I'm sure he never said. Apparently, he told a foreign guest who was trying to eat a biryani with a knife and fork that eating biryani with cutlery is like making love through an interpreter. Which is accurate, by the way, he said it.
This one I think he did.
Yeah,
to double check it and come back to you.
Good one.
Anyway, to lighten things up, let's play a quick fire round.
All right.
All right. Sometimes we darken the lights and make it like Mastermind, but
I'm already frightened.
This is
Your time
easy
starts.
conversation.
Yeah.
And this is just things. This is more to
Actually, do it. I'd love to hear you say to me, I've started, so I'll finish.
We'll do that, and for that, we are going to put you under the spotlight now. Vir, you asked for it. We've darkened the lights. We have a little more lighting. You're in the spotlight. It's something that we call speed shots.
Okay.
We fire a set of rapid-fire questions to you, and you respond to them.
Okay.
The first part of which today we are going to call India on a Plate. In a well-worn tradition of Mastermind, your name,
Vir Sanghvi,
occupation.
journalist.
Vir Sanghvi will set your rapid-fire questions on India on my plate, starting now. Best biryani, Lucknow, Hyderabad, or where?
Tellicherry, Kerala.
A dish that you think defines India.
Dal, because it's made by everyone, takes no money to make, ingredients are not fresh.
Most underrated Indian dish?
Probably a Kerala curry, not regarded as great Indian food abroad, but it is.
And street food? What's a must try from anywhere in India?
Well, I'm from Bombay, so I have to say Bel Puri.
Of course. And a favorite sweet from India?
Jalebis, they're not really from India, but we made them our own.
Best Indian meal you've ever had?
Probably Gaganana, one of the early meals I had when he redefined all the rules of Indian cuisine.
This is in Bangkok.
Yes.
Right. We move to part 2, which is the world
Okay.
on my plate. Paris or Rome for food?
Paris, classic.
What's the most standout dining experience you've had in the last year?
In France, at Versailles, in a hotel on the grounds of the Palace of Versailles, what was done up like a royal dining room, where the staff wore royal clothes and they served it like they would serve. It was modern food, to be fair, in the days of the great French Bourbons. It sounds cheesy and crazy, but the French know how to carry it off.
Any surprising discoveries recently in the world of food? Food dining experiences, I bet.
Yeah, I think I'm very surprised by the fact that Bombay now is India's greatest food city. Delhi used to always be better. It's not true any longer.
Strangest thing you've ever eaten?
I've actually been very careful not to eat monkey's brains or deer's fallopian tubes, because whenever all this stuff is served to me, I always say I'm a Gujarati.
A country you'd visit just for the food?
Oh, Italy.
Favorite Italian dish?
Probably the risotto. Probably the risotto Milanese.
And your favorite food city anywhere in the world?
Bangkok, without a doubt. Great food, all kinds of cuisines, and possibly the greatest cuisine on earth, Thai cuisine.
And that is time. You did very well, Vir.
Thank you. How many points?
Full house.
Oh, very good. I had the terrible feeling, especially with this lighting, if I had a question wrong, they'd take me out and shoot me.
No. Lights up. Lights are back up on and Vir.
That was such an amazing experience. I was never actually bright enough to get onto the Real Mastermind, so it was wonderful to do this. My only regret was you didn't have a buzzer. I was dying for you to say, I've started, so I'll finish.
No, but you acquitted yourself brilliantly on that one. Those are the crispest responses I've had to any of our rapid fire rounds on this particular. Because you knew your answer.
This is my specialist subject.
Yes, of course. It was. And it was good to hear your responses. And of course, you were very sure of what those answers were.
And I'm not really sure, but when you're being asked these questions, you can't say, let me think about it.
No, you can't. Yeah, that's in the swing of things, and that's how it happens. But for a quiz master.
I have actually eaten crazier things, but I didn't want to say it. I have, which I've mainly, but I didn't think of it, I've eaten ants.
Yes, it's a delicacy in some places.
There's a restaurant called Njamani. Yeah, the hand chutneys I can manage.
Yeah.
In the north of Thailand, you get chutneys which apparently have crushed locusts in them. Because if you say to people, what was that menthol taste? They say, oh, that's locust. So, but if you don't know, it's all right. But there's a restaurant called Noma which did a pop-up in Kyoto.
Yes.
And I went and they served a dish of raw shrimp. A sort of a tartar, not even tartar, they were whole shrimp. And on the shrimp were little ants. And I said, I'm not going to eat this. And I know the chef, and he was staring at me, and I said, what kind of food writer will I be? So I just mixed up and I ate them. There was no real taste. So then he came and said, how was it? So it was very nice, but what was that citric flavor? He said, those were the ants, you fool. I didn't know it.
You're formic acid or something like that. Yeah, it was
Apparently they taste like lemon, so a lot of chefs use them instead of citric flavors. Yeah. You and I will squeeze the nimbu on our fish, they'll put an ant.
We would say, why do you use nimbu? So right, exactly. Fried crickets, apparently. It's a Bangkok snack.
Those are locusts. Those are locusts. They're from the north in Chiang Mai and Chiang Rai, where they're the staple food of people because they're very poor people.
And protein rich.
Yeah. Heston Blumenthal wrote a cookbook called Is This a Cookbook? Where he fought with his publishers to include a chapter at the end on the importance of crickets to the survival of the human race, with many recipes involving crickets, which I'm willing to bet not one person has tried. Even he doesn't cook crickets any longer.
Look at that. Yeah. You've written extensively about the luxury and hospitality sector too. How's it involved in India? You've seen it happen over 30, 40 years.
Well, I always feel one of my great regrets is that Indians don't know what we've got. If you look at what passes for luxury now, it's usually factory made products sold at very, very high prices in swish boutiques. And there's nothing particularly luxurious except for the label, and people have gone label mad. But true Indian luxury is if you go to somebody who still will make. I did a whole show called Custom Made on that, who will make you a band gala, who's the sixth generation tailor whose great grandfather taught the family how to do it. You'll go to jeweler who will do perfect handwork. I remember I said I wouldn't use any designer luggage. We found somebody who made a suitcase for me for the same show, and it was, I thought, true luxury. Unfortunately, the luxury industry in India is not as bad as the Far East, but it's getting there. Is everybody just wants labels. As long as it's visible branding, they're happy. You talk to people who sell clothes, for instance, and you ask them what is selling the best. They'll say polo shirts and t-shirts, and for men, and you'll say why, and they say because we put the logo, which is very
Almost a vulgarity, that you wear labels rather than.
there's no almost in that. It is one.
It is
one.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. There used to be a T-shirt when I was in the 80s, which said, "Would Calvin Klein put your name on his bum?" Which I thought was accurate.
We'll come back to the media.
Okay.
You've seen it all, from investigative journalism to the rise of social media. Where are we headed?
I think we have several problems. The first couple of problems are global problems, which is that the economics of the media have changed. You can't really make any money selling newspapers. Even people who I know are literate and well educated don't really read the newspaper any longer. They may look at it and they're back on their phones looking at things. So the print sector really is dead. The problem with that is the economics of most media houses are linked to print. Now, that's not necessarily a problem. The New York Times, which is now extremely profitable, has made its internet site so powerful and so readable that more people read the New York Times now than at any point in history because we all read it on the net.
Online.
But Indian papers haven't done it. I don't think there's one site that is in the same league as the New York Times.
I think perhaps because in India people don't subscribe that much to online sites and
No, listen, I read the Times, London Times every morning.
Yeah.
I read the New York Times and I look at the Indian newspaper sites. But sadly, even though I should be more engaged with newspaper sites in India, I just skim through them.
Right.
So even if you want to, and I do want to, it's never very good and usually not reliable. For the Zakir Hussain example,
Yes.
all the newspaper sites killed him off before he really died.
Yeah. Come to think of it, exactly. You've been a mentor to so many aspiring writers and journalists.
Pushing it, but all right, yeah.
Well,
okay.
All the magazine,
Yeah.
nurtured a lot of talent in everywhere you be.
Yeah, but just because people work for you when you're the editor and then go on to do well, it's wrong to actually take credit for them. It's like I was the first person ever to publish something by Arundhati Roy. We published a
remember.
piece by her in Sunday, but I mean, she'd written the piece already. She gave it to us. We carried it. Then she called me after that was a success and said, I want to write something about Bandit Queen. And I said, sure, go ahead and write it. It was a huge success. It created controversy all over the world. But I mean, my role in that was merely that of the postman, as a sort of middleman.
No, but you encouraged it and you withstood it. But people would have been cautious and said, no, we don't want that. We don't want to ruffle feathers or whatever. Because I remember that running battle between her and Shekhar Kapoor.
You remember?
Yes, sir.
Remember, it became such a huge thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. But to create an ambience or an atmosphere where something like that was encouraged and legitimate, I think is fantastic. So for the teachers and students listening today, what advice would you give on staying informed and building a strong foundation of knowledge?
Well, basically, I believe that many of the subjects I studied in school seemed useless. For instance, did I really care about Indian history and did I really need to know all of this stuff? And now, when you live in an era when history is being rewritten, when lies are being told about our past, you realize how important it is to know history, to know where we came from, to know that we will not repeat the mistakes of the past. So the one lesson I have learned when I was at university, I wanted to study economics and politics. They made me study philosophy. And when I think about it, the only subject that stayed with me is really philosophy, because it helps you negotiate life's problems. So I think what students sometimes forget is that even the stuff they read in their textbooks and mug up for exams, they will forget. What they won't forget is the training that was required to process that data, to work it out. I remember when I went for this famous Oxford interview that they told me about. I'd read an Oxford essay, and the guy said to me, "Why do you want to come to Oxford, Mr. Sanghvi?" And I remember what the right answer was, and I said, "I want to learn how to think." As you know, I got it. But it's true. Yes. It's true. That is what education does. It teaches you how to think. If your brain is not ordered, if you don't know the difference between a lie and the truth, if you don't know where you came from, you don't know where the world is, you're ill-equipped to face tomorrow. So education sometimes seems irritating, sometimes seems like a nuisance, but education is everything.
Yes, and reading is a building block of that.
You have to read, is my view. Even if you want to read on screens or whatever, it doesn't matter. But if you don't read, half your life's.
And really, the best search engine is our brain.
Absolutely.
And I think intelligence will always be more superior than artificial intelligence, is my view. And which was the other thing that I was going to ask you. In the age of Google and artificial intelligence and artificial general interest intelligence, which is coming up, what should young people do to use technology responsibly?
Well, I think it's important to learn that technology, which seems like your servant, is actually your master. For instance, we were talking about lies. If you tell a lie about somebody, you may deny it the next day in print, but it'll stay in your Google search history forever. So if you go through Google and you think you're doing research, you're actually stuck with other people's lies. You really don't know the difference. Be able to tell, look, this doesn't make any sense. It can't be true. I don't care if Google has thrown it up. You need intelligence. So even a Google search is pointless, misleading, and dangerous if you don't have the intelligence to process and to analyze. One of our problems, I think, is that because we have access to information, we think we know everything. In fact, we know less than we ever did.
Which is strange. It's like going to a hypermarket and getting lost because you don't know what you want.
Exactly right. And a hypermarket where you say, to continue our conversation, Louis Vuitton handbags and 4 kinds of Louis Vuitton fake handbags, and you can't tell which one is the real one. That's what the world is like.
This is what it is.
Yeah.
So, what do you think is going to be the future of media, and what our ability to tell the truth from lies and nonsense and noise?
I don't know. I thought the American election was very depressing because many of the things Donald Trump said were demonstrably untrue. Stuff about they're eating dogs and they're eating cats, and you send your son of 10 years old to school and he comes back a girl and all that. And people believe that. So I think that's very dangerous. I think Kellyanne Conway was ahead of her time for once when she talked about alternate facts. We live in a world where our hold on reality and the truth slips further and further away every day. I am not optimistic.
All the more reason why you have to keep fighting the good fight, Vir, and people like you, and may the tribe increase.
Thank you.
Do that, because that's the only hope. Otherwise, what world are we bequeathing to the next generation? I think.
And what are we doing to the sacrifices of people who created this country?
The founding fathers.
The founding fathers. You're just ignoring them, their sacrifices, their jail terms, their attempts to heal communal divides, to unite India. And we just lose ourselves in this mindless social media game. It's very worrying.
Hopefully, this too shall pass.
I hope so. I hope so.
Thank you, Vir, for this appetizing conversation.
Thank you. It's been a privilege and an honor.
My pleasure. From food to facts, you've shown us how stories connect us, teach us, and can inspire us or depress us, as you pointed out. And for our listeners, remember, keep learning, stay curious, and question everything. because that's where the magic of knowledge begins. And that's all for today's episode. A big thank you to Vir for joining us and sharing his very interesting and tasty and thought-provoking journey. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share Quizzitok. Until next time, stay hungry for knowledge and for great food.